Okay, today I'd like to talk about some of the railroads that either came through somewhere in Grant County or around the edge of Grant County, and how did Bloomington sort of miss out on that type of thing, and how important railroads were. And so I'll be reading a little bit from a page that we have in our Bloomington history book. But first of all, we're going to try to zoom in to see where some of the railroad routes were in the Grant County area. Now sometimes, of course, we refer to them as maybe like a spider web, but that spider web never quite made it to Bloomington. There were attempts from Fenimore and Lancaster, also from the Cassville area, but never quite succeeded, never quite enough money. But I will read a little bit here from our history book, kind of get everything in mind. The village of Bloomington has the distinction of becoming an active trading center with many businesses without ever having a direct connection with the railroad, when being bypassed by a railroad was almost a certain death sentence in the past. Although Bloomington tried for at least 37 years to get a thread from the vast spiderweb network of branch lines, it and surrounding townships and smaller villages could never obtain or guarantee enough capital or money to build a railroad. Probably the best opportunity happened during the years 1881 to 1883, when the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad actually surveyed routes from Lancaster and from Fenimore and selected a location for a depot. This was before the River Railroad, the Burlington at the time, was built in 1884, and Glen Haven became a very heavily used railroad freight location for several decades. Ranking also next was the Milwaukee Road Depot at Bridgeport and the Bagley Burlington Depot at Bagley. And we'll be looking at something special at the tail end of our presentation today concerning the older Bagley Depot. Now, because everything seemed so optimistic at the time, and the Bloomington Record newspaper realized that later on, maybe we shouldn't have sounded quite so optimistic, that we should have been working a little bit harder to get it to come. Everybody kind of thought, well, for sure, it will show up. The next best chance after, in the 1882 newspaper talks about there, even where it would be located, some of the people, which probably wouldn't ring any bells at this time, but that was all figured out, the exact distance and everything. Part of the problem coming from Fenimore, there's that gap in the ridge. If you notice when you go there, where you kind of go down and dip and back up again with the road, there's an open area. When Jack Welch was around and was with the People's Telephone Company for a long time, he said part of the problem was the expense of building a trestle across that big gap. And there's other problems like that when you're going up and down a hill, inclines, a lot more coal gets burned with the steam locomotives, so there are lots of problems that were involved in trying to work out a definite route. Now, even hope remained eternal when Kickapoo and Northern Railroad, which ran from Waseca to Lafarge in 1901, surveyed a route that would go from Waseca through Bloomington and other towns on the way to Galena or East Dubuque. That idea died in 1903 when the Milwaukee Road took over the line. Some Milwaukee Road officials did pay a visit to Bloomington in November of 1905, which caused some rumors to circulate for a while. And then, of course, when things got closer to World War II, World War I, that there just were too many other demands on things, and the interest kind of died, and people quit trying. But there was a person named Pat Flynn, a very likable Irishman, an experienced railroad builder, thought for sure that one time or another it would get done. He did help with building in the track at the Bloomington Fairgrounds, so he was an important individual at that time. Now, I'd like to point out some of the railroads represented by these locomotives. These are just models that I picked up at one time or another. This one is what was called a 10-wheeler, which was a lighter weight locomotive that was used on a lot of the smaller branch lines because they didn't always have such heavy rail to travel on, strong enough rail to travel on. And we'll be looking at later here a picture of some locomotives much about the same size, but how they look different with smokestack and everything else. Now, after the Milwaukee Road came to an end here in this area of Wisconsin, several different short lines tried for a while, but there wasn't too much success until this one here, the Wisconsin and Southern, was formed. And that ran on a lot of the old Milwaukee Road lines and on some of the old Chicago and Northwestern lines in Wisconsin. And they did establish a connection with Chicago. So they became rather important. They're a short liner and carrying a lot of grains types of things on the railroad. And where it runs now from the line from Prairie du Chien to Madison, a lot of that's been rebuilt, new railroad ties put in, trestles fixed and so on, and starting to add some new rail, but that's still a major project yet that they're working on because a lot of the newer railroad cars are very heavy. Now, another railroad in the area, the Chicago and Northwestern. I see a diesel representation here. And that used to run from Madison clear down to Fenimore, and there was the narrow gauge that ran on down to Woodman, and then also a branch that ran from Fenimore over to Lancaster. And of course that railroad was also taken over here by larger giant. There's been so many mergers here the last few years of what's happened to the railroads. And way over here we have a Burlington Northern diesel, and of course now it's also known as the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. Another combination took place. So the colorization and everything looks quite a bit different, and you might see different locomotives pulling some of the trains even nowadays. They're ones that they've taken over or have joined in with them. Now, over here, now these are a couple pictures from the Kickapoo Valley and Northern Railroad, what it was called at first, which ran from Waseca to Lafarge in Crawford County and Vernon County, and how it looked with the big tall smokestack, not as streamlined looking, but probably somewhat similar to the other one that we saw that was so much more streamlined. So we can see that designs changed a lot over the years. In the next scene we have We see the locomotive pulling some of the freight cars there on the line, in the Kickapoo line. And you might see some of the letters there on the side of the freight car referring to the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul and Pacific Railroad, the abbreviation there for it. And of course, for so many years, always known just as the Milwaukee Road after a while. And they were able to take over the Kickapoo Valley and Northern Railroad. That lasted until about 1939. Things were declining for a while. Depression years, remember in the 30s, that was the problem for every kind of a business, it seemed like. And railroads were affected too. And when the roads improved more and more, trucks could get around better on the highways. The highways were made better. And of course that's what brought some things to an end. And one of the last things will be, we'll talk a little bit about the dinky. And what we're zooming in here on the sheet is what's on the historical sign about the dinky. We do have a couple books that cover the subject a little bit here in the library that can be looked at in the history room, that can be looked at by an individual. So we won't mention any particular titles or show any pages from those yet. Now, in the there is the Fenimore Railroad Museum, and you'll see down the bottom part here. Now be sure to check, because this was from an older brochure. The hours might have changed and times open, but it's still there. Nice place to visit. They don't have one of the original ones on the line that ran from Fenimore to Woodman, but they have one that's very similar to what the narrow gauge locomotives looked like, what they were like, so they did attain one of those. Now what it says here about the dinky: Fenimore's narrow gauge train, affectionately known as the dinky, operated from 1878 to 1926, far longer than most 3-foot gauge lines in Wisconsin. At a nearby depot, standard and narrow gauge trains exchanged their passengers and freight. Trains ran daily between Fenimore and Woodman by the way of Worley, Anderson Mills, and Conley Cut, meandering 16 miles through the Green River Valley and serving as a key link to other railroads. The line was famous for a horseshoe curve that made it possible to climb the steep slope from the valley to the ridge west of Fenimore. The dinky was noted for its versatility, carrying farmers, fishermen, salesmen, and schoolchildren, as well as U.S. mail, milk, livestock, and other freight. The narrow gauge line was a remnant of a larger 92-mile system in southwestern Wisconsin, purchased by the Chicago and Northwestern in 1880. All except the Fenimore-Woodman line were converted in 1882 to standard 4 feet 8 1/2 inches gauge. Narrow gauge tracks once were scattered across the country as railroad builders looked for economy in construction and equipment costs to reach remote areas. At the peak of narrow gauge operations, the state had 150 miles, some used in logging operations in northern Wisconsin, now all long abandoned. Now one more thing here I thought would be of interest to people. Here is a copy, photocopy here, of the original depot at Bagley that was brought to me some years back by a person that, it was a person in the scene there from a family in the area, and wanted to know what maybe could be done. Well, I'll let you know that there were at least 2 people, I think one is no longer even around anymore, that worked on this. The problem is when you look where there's a person, if there's a crack or break in the person's face, that's where a lot of work takes place. And so the big thing is, the person has the computer and enough knowledge about using everything that's available on the computer, you can save things, but the thing is the amount of time involved. And it takes a lot of time. But you look over here, now this is sort of a sepia tone. To me, I kind of like that because it sort of gives it a little more of an older look. You can get things done just as standard black and white, but I do like sort of the sepia. And you can see how that really brings the whole scene to life. It's even larger in size here in the depot, and the way the men in that look and that scene there in Bagley. So just keep in mind that things like that can be done, but you need to be able to find someone that's willing to spend the time, and that you can afford to pay them for the time that's involved in doing that. But just shows you that if something is considered very important to your family and it's not in the best of shape, there are ways that it can be saved and try to reestablish it again. That covers today's program here concerning railroads here in the Grant County area.